Hi, I'm Vadd, and I have to tell you that Corsair Cove might be one of the most fun city builders I've played in a long time. Not because it's enormous, not because it buries you under 100 different resources and systems, and not because it's trying to reinvent every part of the city building management genre. It's because Corsair Cove takes something city builders have been doing forever, moving resources from one place to another, and it has found a way to make that problem feel physical again. Your settlement isn't spread across flat ground, it is hanging off the side of, over, and around cliffs. Your buildings are quite literally wedged into whatever space you can find. Your pirates are moving supplies across rope bridges, elevators, wooden walkways, zip lines. Your production chains might start at the top of one cliff, move across an island, drop down a few levels, and finally end up inside another tavern that's just waiting for a barrel of ale. And for me, when it all works, Corsair Cove is just fantastic. You don't just know you've solved the logistics problem, you can actually look at the island and see the solution. The problem for me is that Corsair Cove is much better at creating those logistical problems than it is at keeping you busy once you've solved them, because eventually your settlement will stabilize. Your production is just humming along, you understand the systems, and instead of giving you another complicated problem to untangle, this game sometimes tells you to wait. Wait for your ship. Wait for that metric you need another deed in. Wait for an event. Wait for another opportunity to get more pirates for your island. And on some level, this contradiction is at the center of my review. Corsair Cove is a city builder overflowing with clever ways to keep you playing, to keep you thinking, keep you engaged, but every so often it gets in its own way and asks you to stop. I think the real question here is whether those pacing problems are enough to undermine what is otherwise one of the more interesting management games that I've covered recently. And for me personally, they are not, but they do keep Corsair Cove from being quite as good as its central idea and themes deserve. Listen, really quick here, if this review is making sense to you, liking this video helps signal other people that this might be worth their time. If you want to support the work I do here more directly, there is a single pay what you want tier through Patreon as well as YouTube channel members that you can do to help me keep making more of videos just like this. Thank you. I gotta tell you, Corsair Cove launched at $40 US, and day one on Steam and had a sale bringing that price down to $30 US. We'll talk about this a little later, but I think that price difference does matter, as one of these price points makes a lot more sense than the other here at launch. If you had to ask me what this game is, in kind of one sentence, I'd say that Corsair Cove is a pirate-themed city builder where the city itself is just one enormous, beautiful logistical puzzle. You're going to arrive for the first journey probably at Skull Rock with limited space, and you're going to start building a pirate settlement right into the cliffs. If you've ever played a management game before, the basic economic loop will be immediately understandable to you. You find a resource, you build a collection building, you move that resource to somewhere that refines it, and you keep on rolling. Listen, you're going to take finished goods to keep your pirates happy, to expand your settlement, to make some money, and just to support other more complicated production chains. This part is familiar. The difference here for me is where you're building all of this, because you don't have a nice empty field where you can draw out your nice little square box. Instead, the island is here to fight you, because buildings need to be attached to cliffs and rocky surfaces. The resources you need are there, but they're in specific locations that your pirates will need physical routes between everything. At first, those routes start out with just wooden paths and rope bridges, but over time you can unlock elevators, zip lines, and all kinds of fun little environmental puzzly things to help you move around a vertical settlement. And that verticality and that logistics is the core of this game. The facts are, Corsair Cove in its design isn't really asking whether you can produce a thing. Yes, you know how to get a pig farm running, but it's really asking whether you can produce it efficiently while working around a deliberately awkward environment. And then there's kind of a second half to this game, kind of a flip of a coin here. The other side of the coin here are the ships. You'll be building vessels, assigning crews and captains, and you're going to send them out across the ocean to hunt treasure, smuggle goods, raid target, complete adventures. It's a little questy system. These expeditions use a complete different set of mechanics. This is actually a card-based system. Your crew members and captain are going to provide you with statistical points represented on your cards, and different encounters you have with your ships will use the cards different ways. You have offensive cards, defensive cards, utility cards. Stealth missions have their own goal. You might be tasked with chasing the ship to close distances or escape. There's all kinds of fun little adventures here. On top of this mini game with the cards also have a dice roll, because of course they do. We're pirates, right? It's kind of on theme. These expeditions are so much lighter than the city building. Let me be clear here. These are not separate side activities that just exist because this is a pirate themed game. This is actually an important part of the city because the ocean and the city kind of feed into each other. Your settlement that you're building is supporting your fleet, and your fleet goes out and brings back resources and progression that supports the settlement. It's all connected. I think it's connected so successfully that it doesn't feel like two unrelated games or a mini game or a side event. It's something that keeps you engaged and involved with the world. Your ship is on a timer. You've sent it out. You know, in a couple of minutes, you're going to need to do a thing. You're connecting your resources. Your ship dings, hey, come check on me. way, you're in a fight with your ship, you're back at your city while the ship's on the way back. Just things are going well. Let's be clear here. Corsair Cove looks like a pirate city builder. That's exactly what it is. But I think that description by itself, Pirate City Builder, a little bit is underselling what you're actually doing most of the time. Yes, the pirate theme is important, it's core, it's there, it's abundant, but you're going to build ships to recruit pirates, to raid merchants, to go treasure hunting. While at the same time, Corsair Cove is really a logistics game. I think the fantasy isn't simply becoming a powerful pirate ruler. I think the fantasy here being sold is that you can somehow make an increasingly absurd pile of buildings, bridges, and productions routes that actually work, while at the same time get sucked on a little side adventure that's actually integral to your city where your naval combat matters. I think the expeditions are useful, but at the same time, your ship expeditions on a long enough time plane, they lack a little bit of variety. Yes, they're thematically appropriate, they play an important role in progression, they're supporting the city builder, but the settlement for me is the star of the show. I think a lot of times with the city building game, it eventually turns into an exercise in optimizing your space. Here in Corsair Cove, it immediately from the very beginning makes space inconvenient. You need a lumberjack, you got to find a forest. You need stone, you got to quarry it on a stone node. Salt, water, fish, there's all kinds of gathering points that further add to the complication of the puzzle of getting your logistics just right. Let's remember, those are all raw materials, so those need to probably reach some kind of a refining production building. You can't just take the entire production chain and stack everything beside it neatly in a warehouse. The resources themselves stop you from doing that. The island you're on is the puzzle. Lots of times as you journey on, you're going to discover you have a good working route, but it's just too slow, it just takes too long, production slows down, and you have another bottleneck. On some level, what's great about Corsair Cove is that almost every time something goes wrong, the game immediately gives you visually several possible answers. I like that so much here. You're truly given a toolbox of options. You have resources sitting on top of a cliff. Have you built a zip line down? It's a lot faster than a bridge. Your warehouse can't keep a certain ale in stock maybe. Have you connected it properly to a tavern or right to the supply chain? You can bypass warehouses entirely and just tell that tavern to collect directly from the source. You can click on a building and immediately see the routes supplying it, and they're color coded as well. Red is bad, green is good. Figure it out. It's kind of nice because here you're not just guessing why something isn't working. You can quite literally trace the problem and go, yeah, that looks bad. That's 3 elevators, 4 zip lines, and 10 minutes of running for a bottle of ale. That doesn't work. Let's do better. What I want you to know here is this is not merely a pirate-themed production chain game. It's a game about physically constructing the solutions to your economy. My first few hours of Corsair Cove, everything was so deceptively simple. My settlement was rough. I placed a few basic buildings. I've got a tent, a warehouse, a campfire, and all of a sudden things are coming together. Suddenly I get more pirates. I need more tents. We don't have enough food. I need more campfires. Suddenly everyone wants something to drink. I've got tents hanging from rocks. And slowly I'm starting to learn how to manage the geography and my economy. I'm working my way through where do things physically sit? What resource is this? How do I connect them? Where are my pirates slow? Everything feels so messy. Everything is absurdly just sloppy, but it's a good mess because you aren't supposed to build something elegant immediately. You're not building 90-degree roads and spacing them out for your 10 little houses. No, no, no. You're slowly turning a pirate camp stuck into the side of the rock into something functioning. And I think this challenge is more interesting as the settlement expands because you need to create more little outposts. Over time, you're going to discover resources you need outside of your immediate range, and you're going to start building more buildings and more resources and more traffic. And all of a sudden, the whole place starts to look like, I don't know, like a spider got drunk and decided to become an engineer. Ropes are everywhere. The walkways overlap, zip lines stretched between cliffs. I've got elevators moving pirates up and down. I've got this disaster. It looks like an absolute nightmare, but you know what? It actually works, and I made it. I think that visual growth is one of the best rewards here in Corsair Cove. You're not just watching numbers go up. The logistical history of the settlement is visible. I see old lines I built that no one's walking on anymore because I have a faster path. I've got a rope line that just moves things. You're looking at a ridiculous cluster of connections, and you, the city builder, remember why every one of those collections existed. My city, when I look at it, tells me a story of that second route that stopped the tavern from running dry, of that elevator that made the production chain fast enough to defend my city from the fleet. I can remember the timer as the ships were coming in, my cannons were low on ammo, and my supply chain was stress tested. Your city is a physical record of the problems you solve. But that's kind of the early game into the mid game into the late game. What happens in kind of like the end game into the late game into the mid game, right? Kind of that second half of things. Once you've solved the current wave of problems, there are often periods where there just simply isn't enough happening. Your settlement will and can stabilize, your pirates' needs are met, your production chains are working, and now you're waiting for progression because progression is heavily tied to deeds. There are 4 principles here of pirates here with the Corsair Cove. You have the empire, notoriety, seafaring, and wealth. And these deeds are objectives that are connected to kind of like a tech tree, but a little little better than that. You're going to complete objectives that earn you points to move you through the game's tech compass. I really like the system. The problem here is that if the deeds you need isn't something you can complete immediately, you lose momentum fast. And suddenly the game that was asking you to constantly examine, modify, and improve your settlement becomes a game where you hit the speed controls, sit back, and watch. I don't think this ruins Corsair Cove, but you definitely feel the change when it happens. The opening makes you feel like there's always another fire to put out, another thing you can actually get done, check off your list, move on to the next thing, but suddenly the game will just sit there and go, hey, click the speed control, let time move forward. You're just kind of waiting until you can complete that next deed. There were times when I was playing later into my journey where I just kind of wish something would go wrong so I had something to do. I really do believe the settlement planning is Corsair Cove's strongest system, but a lot of that comes from how readable everything is. There are very complex logistics here that at a glance, you just know what isn't working. You can see the line. There's a red line from point A to point B, and it traces every pathway. You can look at your list of buildings, you can inspect it, you can say, hey, these paths feeding into it are just not efficient. And I know this sounds like such a small thing, but if you're a veteran of the genre, you and I both know that oftentimes complex logistic games sometimes create difficulty by hiding information. This is not one of those games. For me, I spend less time wondering where the problem is, and I spent more time deciding what I was going to do about it. I think the solutions continue to stay interesting because the terrain keeps interfering. The resource isn't just far away, it's just point A to point B. I can see them both, I can draw a line between them, but there's some verticality here. Because the truth is, I can technically connect something, but if they aren't efficiently connected, it's almost not worth connecting them. There's tools like zip lines I really like. There's all kinds of infrastructure with the elevators you can try and figure out. What I want you to know here is you don't need a spreadsheet to understand if your new connection worked or didn't. I think this accessibility is important because Corsair Cove sits at kind of an interesting place difficulty-wise. If you've played a lot of city builders, I don't think these systems are going to overwhelm you even a little bit. I think experienced players will identify many of the solutions very quickly. Corsair Cove asks you to understand production chains, travel times, resource placement, population, colony health, and progression while also dealing with unusual vertical building rules. But if you're newer to management games, you might have a very different experience. All those things I just listed might sound overwhelming. Production chains, travel times, resource placement, population, colony health, and progression. I think there's a good bit of difficulty here for someone who's truly new to the genre, but I really think veteran players are going to find this less of a challenge. I think that forgiving construction tools here are what helps a lot. The game wants you to build strange connections and generally just lets you. You're not constantly fighting placement rules to try and get a bridge attached at just the right angle. Everything's snapped together nicely. If there's a reasonable way to connect two locations, Corsair Cove usually lets you do it. Again, that means the challenge here isn't fighting the connection controls, but instead you deciding whether what you've built you can connect in an efficient way. And I think that's the right priority. Again, the seafaring gameplay I find a little less convincing. I love this idea. You construct the ship, you choose the crew, you assign a captain, you've got attributes from your captain, attributes from your crew, attributes from the ship type you built. There's this nice connection between the people and the settlement and what happens at sea. Your ship isn't just a unit you purchase from a menu. The cards and dice that your ship rolls actually matter for the different activities you do with them. You have stealth encounters, chases, fights, all kinds of fun things with your ship, and I enjoyed it very much so early on. The problem for me with this mechanic is the depth. Later in my journey, the turn-based encounters I realized were simple enough that the repetition caught up to them. I almost wanted an auto battle feature. And after you've completed a lot of these activities, you're no longer discovering things. You're just executing on a system you completely understand. They don't really reinvent themselves. The whole way through, you're going to draw cards, play them. Draw cards, watch the dice roll. And because these expeditions with your ship are one of the things you will end up waiting on as your city is stabilized, this creates a really bad combination. The city builder here sometimes slows down because you're waiting on the sea. And then the thing you're waiting for isn't mechanically deep enough to justify how central it becomes to progression. I want to be clear here. I like the naval gameplay. I just don't think it develops as well as the settlement does. There's nothing worse than waiting 4 to 5 minutes for a couple of sailors to come back so you can actually have the manpower to get a job done. It's just not fun. I want to say though, the deed system is probably maybe my second most favorite idea in all of Corsair Cove. Instead of having a generic research currency feeding into a traditional technology tree, your progression here reflects what you're actually doing. Again, you have 4 broad pirate principles: empire, wealth, seafaring, notoriety. And the deeds are tied to those principles. So you realize that you're growing your population, maybe you're hunting whales, you've been raiding a lot of merchant ships. Each of these are actually objectives in the deeds you can pin on your screen that earn you points to spend in the tech compass. That's where you unlock better buildings, more efficient buildings, larger homes for your pirates. You start off with tents that only hold 2 pirates, and eventually you get things that hold quite a bit more than 2. You get really useful upgrades here, like additional resources, improved ships. I really like this progression because it's behavior tied. The game isn't asking you to wait for a research bar to fill. It's asking you to act like a pirate ruler you are becoming. That's right, you're hunting whales, you're raiding merchant ships, you're growing your pirate population. There's enough flexibility here that picking one principle doesn't lock you out of the basic tools required to keep playing. You're going to be doing these deeds just by playing the game. You're going to make natural progression in several categories at the same time while running your basic settlement. I think this system encourages a preferred direction without turning that decision into a trap. There's a smart balance here. It reinforces the connection between the land and the sea. You improve your settlement by completing deeds, and a lot of deeds are completed by your ship out on the water doing pirate stuff. It's this really charming little circle. Your fleet completes activities, it contributes to progression, the progression gives you more tools to expand your settlement. This is exactly what I want for multiple systems inside the same management game. They don't just merely coexist, instead they each give each other a reason to exist. This means that where progression struggles again is the timing, because deeds aren't just bonuses, they are the road forward. You have to be completing these deeds, earn the points to keep moving forward. And when the road forward requires something that isn't currently happening, the game slows down, especially early on. You just don't have as many tools or options unlocked, and there's more waiting than there should be in that early game. A small example is population control, or just the coins, the currency you need. You need more storehouses, so you need to get coins to buy the storehouses, but you don't have the coins because your ship lost a fight and you're trying to rebuild your ship, or your ship, is going to take 5 more minutes to get back, and you have 5 minutes of waiting. You need more population. There's no easy way to get additional pirates. Yes, there are random events, there's ships you can raid, but it all takes time. It all takes quite a bit of time, and it's all RNG there. You have to hope there's a shipwreck that appears where you have an option to welcome more pirates. And then that's when you realize that if you accept new population, it costs you cohesion. We haven't talked about cohesion yet. This is actually a really important resource. It's kind of like the health of your colony, right? You've got this pirate colony and they need a level of cohesion to keep functioning. And a lot of your decisions and events will spend this cohesion. So if you're already struggling, spending a chunk of your cohesion to gain the pirates you desperately need creates a very awkward early game tension. Yes, I think tension is good. The problem here is that you don't always have a reliable action that solves it. For comparison, when I have a production problem, very early on, I have a lot of agency on how to solve that. I can move buildings, redesign something, get a more efficient path, but when I'm waiting for pirates or some gold coins in my pocket to build a storehouse, I just have to wait. Sometimes that's my only option, is just to wait. And that's not optimal. Corsair Cove is at its best when every problem makes me build something, change something, rethink something, interact with the world. It is at its weakest when the answer to a problem is to increase the game speed. I'm going to say that again. Corsair Cove is at its best when every problem makes me build something, change something, rethink something, just interact with the world. And Corsair Cove is at its weakest when the answer is simply to click increase game speed and wait. I want to be clear here. On a long enough timeline, this improves because you eventually just always have additional buildings and opportunities and ways to get more cohesion and population. It makes all this easier, but it makes the early progression so less consistent. I'm not talking about a permanent flaw in the system or that destroys the campaign, but it's definitely a struggle here. I think the pirate setting works extremely well. I think a major reason is that the theme here actually affects what you're doing. This isn't just a city builder where you have a piece of pirate art. This is actually core to the game. The cliffs, the rope bridges, the ramshackle homes, the ships, the raids, the way your settlement physically hangs, it all just reinforces this Pirate Cove fantasy. And visually here, Corsair Cove gets a huge amount of personality from the infrastructure. A conventional settlement game, it just has these clean lines over time. Corsair Cove just looks more complicated in the best possible way. Your success creates this ridiculous maze of connections, and I mean this as an absolute compliment. There's something extremely satisfying about zooming out and just seeing dozens of logistical decisions expressed across the landscape. You didn't plan those routes because they look nice. You planned them because something else wasn't working, and the solution becomes a part of the scenery. You're not building a pirate city. You are smuggling, raiding ships, and searching for treasure. You're not just searching for treasure. You're using that treasure to build your pirate city. You're dealing with random events. There's a campaign mode here and a couple of extra uncharted maps that also give more structure to the game than simply handing you an empty sandbox and telling you to entertain yourself. The maps have their own storylines, giving players more to work through once you've kind of learned the core systems. I don't think story is the main reason to play Corsair Cove. I'm not saying it's bad or unappealing. I actually liked it quite a bit, but I think it's the mechanics and identity of the game that really pulled this one forward, because the strengths here is that it makes optimization fun to look at. And let's be clear here, that's harder than it sounds. I'll say it again. Corsair Cove's one of its greatest strengths is that it makes optimization fun to look at. I think oftentimes logistical improvements sometimes disappear and just vanish into numbers. Okay, your output increased, efficiency rose, travel time decreased, but not here. In Corsair Cove, it turns optimization into construction. You fix a problem by physically changing the land you're on, which means every improvement changes the city in a major way. At the same time, there's a flexibility to things. There's usually multiple ways to address an inefficient problem. I think that makes your decisions feel like they matter. You've got options. I think another strength here for Corsair Cove is the progression system of the deeds. I think it's far more interesting to me than unlocking technology with some abstract resource. You progress by doing things, and your behavior determines which area advances the fastest. And again, because both the settlement and the ocean contribute with your ships, neither half is optional. Corsair Cove really does understand when to be forgiving. There's a building system that gives you lots of flexibility. There's crises you generally have multiple options to recover from, and a shortage of one thing doesn't immediately doom the entire colony. At the same time, the biggest weakness here is most definitely pacing, and everything else kind of branches from that. Corsair Cove is designed around solving problems, so when there isn't a problem to solve, all momentum stops. Yes, the settlement can stabilize faster than the progression system provides new objectives, your ships takes time, and these deeds can require conditions you're just not quite ready to satisfy. When all these things start to overlap, like population control and resource management, like the coins early on, you're not really managing anything, you're just waiting for permission to manage something again. On top of that, like I said earlier, the naval encounters do not have enough depth to carry the amount of repetition you will eventually see. I think the cards are a good foundation, the different mission types help, yes, there's ship identity with crew composition and the various captains, but after enough encounters, your decision making is wildly predictable. I think part of why it stands out so much is because your city building keeps generating interesting problems to solve. So the stronger half of the game keeps reminding you that the weaker half is stopping everything. I also want to highlight one more time here that experienced management players may find this easier than its complicated looking settlement suggests. Yes, the city just will look insane over time, but visual complexity does not mean mechanical difficulty. Once you understand how Corsair Cove communicates bottlenecks and what tools solve them, many economic problems become very approachable, and I think for more experienced players, the pacing problems are going to stand out significantly. At the same time, I think if you're a little more new to the genre, a little less experienced, the opposite's going to be true. I think the first few hours are going to have a pretty steep learning curve asking you to understand a lot of interacting systems. Not because the game does a bad job of explaining it, it's just all new. Corsair Cove has this unusual learning curve where I think newcomers may feel overwhelmed, while genre veterans might eventually want the game to push them harder. Corsair Cove launched at $40 on Steam and had a day one sale price of $30, and I think this is a very different conversation. At $40, Corsair Cove is expensive enough that I start looking a lot harder at those weaknesses. Yes, the city building I found quite excellent. The progression system is interesting, and there is a proper campaign structure, and it didn't launch with just one map. There's an Uncharted mode, there's 2 additional maps. They have their own storylines. This is not a tiny game being stretched into a premium price. There is a real package here. But $40 also makes me take a harder look at those pacing problems. They become much harder to ignore. The repetition and the naval encounters are really a problem here. Experienced city builders may eventually really wish Corsair Cove pushed its systems further than it does. At the full premium $40 price, I think you should already know, if you're a veteran of the genre, if vertical logistics systems is something you're interested in. If you look at this game and immediately want to start connecting buildings with ropes, bridges, elevators, zip lines, I think the core system here is good enough to justify the purchase. But I wouldn't call $40 an automatic recommendation for every city building player. When we get closer to the $20, $25, $30 range, I'm much more comfortable recommending things. I think that's the price Corsair Cove launched at Steam with the day one discount, because I think that's where the overall value of the package makes more sense. For $20, $25, $30, you're getting a city builder with a genuinely distinct central mechanic rather than another variation of a familiar grid. You've got a campaign, a progression system, naval activities, you have more than one map. I think there's replay value in just finding different solutions to the same logistical problem. The important distinction is that the value here isn't really coming from naval combat. Those systems will become repetitive. The value comes from whether you enjoy the building, diagnosing, and rebuilding of your settlement. If that core group grabs you, there's plenty here. And if it doesn't, the pirate theme will not carry the entire package. When I look at this, sum it up in a simple version, right? At $40, if you already know this is your kind of city builder, it's not a bad ask. At $30, it's a good price. And considering $30 was the actual day one Steam price, and at the time of review, it is still at that price, I think Corsair Cove launched at a reasonable price, at that sale price of $30. At its core, Corsair Cove is for players who like logistics. Not necessarily people who want the hardest management game possible. If you're looking to enjoy a production chain, asking why it isn't working, trying to solve a physical layout problem, if you enjoy optimizing routes, reducing travel time, you want a city builder with a little personality, this is a good pickup for you. But if you're here looking for extreme, deep naval strategy, this is not the game for you. Yes, the ships are important, useful, and contribute to progression, but the encounters are repetitive. You are truly an experienced city building player who primarily wants extreme difficulty. This game might feel a little gentle. Yes, there's complexity here, but a lot of the challenge comes from understanding the layout rather than surviving some unforgiving economy. If you hate any waiting management games, I think the pacing problems here are worth taking note of. There are periods where your settlement is just stable, and that next useful step is dependent on a ship returning for a deed to become achievable or another opportunity to appear. These moments are not constant, but they are noticeable. If you've listened to my review this far, it should be a little obvious what I say next, is that if you don't enjoy logistics puzzles, the pirate theme is not going to magically change that. Corsair Cove's best mechanic is moving things efficiently through a complicated settlement. That's the game. Corsair Cove takes one of the oldest ideas in a city building game, and I think finds a genuinely fun way to present it. I enjoyed my time here. I think when Corsair Cove is at its best, it's readable without being mindless, it's flexible without removing the need to plan. It's complicated enough without constantly punishing you for experimenting. I love the sea helping the settlement helping the sea. I love the fleet system, how it feeds into everything. It's all on theme. It all works together nicely. And my only frustration is occasionally there's nothing for me to do. Occasionally I hit a bottleneck I can just wait to solve. When progression stalls, it doesn't feel good. And these aren't tiny complaints. They're the reason I don't think Corsair Cove reaches the absolute top of the genre. Facts are, every time Corsair Cove handed the controls to me and gave me a problem to solve, I wanted to solve it. I wanted to make my route shorter. I wanted to learn how to route better zip lines. I wanted to set up my warehouses efficiently. I wanted to turn a ridiculous pile of pirate infrastructure into something efficient. I think the core idea here works. It's not the hardest city builder around. It's not the deepest naval game, and the pacing occasionally needs someone to light a fire under it, but it keeps producing moments where you can look at your settlement and know exactly why it looks the way it does. At the time of review, Corsair Cove is awarded a 4 out of 5. I recommend. Not because everything here is equally strong, it's not, but the vertical city building is good enough, distinct enough, and well supported enough. I think it carries some of the weaker parts. Corsair Cove's biggest problem is that sometimes it makes you wait to get back to the things it does best, and the thing it does best is good.